Y'all know that song? Tick tock, tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. Take a chance cause you might grow. The transits that are happening this upcoming week of March and that we had even last week, which we're going to sort of debrief from, are all pointing to us finally getting into action. If you are someone who is getting over maybe the eclipse season, maybe you're finally starting to untangle some Mercury retrograde related experiences or even confusion, or maybe you're finally feeling slightly ready. Maybe you're peeking out from your winter hibernation cave and you're like, I'm kind of ready to get out there. If you're in the northern hemisphere, if you're in the southern hemisphere, there's the ending to summer coming up this week, then this video is for you. I say that because the overarching themes this week are in alignment with that song in a lot of ways of like, take a chance because you might grow. There's momentum happening within us and outside of us as a collective where we have two major retrogrades that are ending. We have the Spring Equinox and the true astrological new year, the Spring Equinox for us here on the northern hemisphere and the autumnal equinox if you're in the southern hemisphere, and so much more. So we're going to be diving into the top transits happening this week. I'm going to give you a personal story that is a great example of why astrology tell you don't initiate major things under a retrograde, a cautionary tale. Oh, and of course, we're going to be talking about this upcoming Pisces New Moon that is happening this upcoming week, what it means for you uniquely based off of your zodiac sign. And yeah, man, we're back, baby. Okay. So with that said, let's get into our intro that I have written here. Welcome to Aligned Weekly, your weekly mix of the top transits, smart and fun, news and psychology and health, and listener-led advice segments so that you can stay informed and aligned all week. I'm your host, Alina Brown. So grab your coffee, start that commute, start that chore or that walk, and let's align together. Aligned Weekly is brought to you by the company Auralign. That's my company. And we produce astrology planners, calendar stationery, as well as digital planners and calendars, which you can get instantly today. All right, y'all. So with that said, let's go ahead and just dive into it. I do want to acknowledge the elephant in the room. Maybe it's the baby elephant right here. Can I superimpose something? I was MIA for the last few weeks and I apologize for not being here. And I just want to say I will give you a little life update at the end of the video. It's time-stamped, but all I can say is, yo, I got by that eclipse, okay? Like that eclipse energy hit my chart and impacted me so directly. It was so on the nose that even as an astrologer, I said out loud to my husband multiple times, like, astrology is real. This is real. Like, with that said, let's go ahead and dive into first the top transits for the week ahead. So I'm going to be talking about the transits that are happening from March 16th through the 22nd that week. And that includes obviously the Pisces New Moon. So we'll talk about that. Okay. First transit that we can talk about is Jupiter ended its retrograde in Cancer on the same day that the moon was in Sagittarius. Now, what does that mean? So for one, let's back up a little bit. I'm going to just give you some foundational understanding. Okay, actually, let me start with what it generally means for us as a collective. It means a lot of great things. This is just case number one. Boom. I'm creating a case for you guys, this whole video of why there are so many transits that are indicating forward momentum for us as a collective. I will say a small caveat. There are notable transits that are tied to the natal chart of the United States, to the natal chart of certain world leaders that don't look as sunny, that don't look as optimistic. And I personally don't specialize in more national related, directly national, sort of political, geopolitical related astrology. So I'm talking about us as a collective, more of our interpersonal life. But I also want to give a caveat that there are specific transits that are directly activating more geopolitical happenings that are going on right now. And if you want to dive deeper into that, I highly suggest checking out the podcast called The Astrology Podcast with Chris Brennan. He does a lot of great videos and he's been leaning more into talking about transits tied back to more geopolitical and world news as it pertains to how it uniquely interacts with those natal charts and with world leaders' natal charts. So Just so you guys know. So I just want to give you that context. I think it would actually it would behoove all of us to be aware of what is playing out, the trend that's tied to it, and what we might expect moving forward. Okay, with that said, let's go back into Jupiter ending its retrograde. When Jupiter ends a retrograde, we see that Jupiter is the planet of luck and expansion. And expansion involves an expansion of awareness and learning and understanding the world, and an expansion of our understanding of things, right? And how we can end up having luck or an expansion of our ideas, abundance, through those different avenues that are tied back to Jupiter, right? And so when we see that Jupiter goes retrograde, as with all planets, the effect that it has, or the sort of life experiences that it is tied to, end up, a retrograde indicates that that goes more inward, that we end up retrograding, circling back to different life experiences, and we tend to be more introspective. And so that sort of Jupiter expansion becomes more of an expansion of our inner, mansion of awareness. And so over the last few months, over this winter period, as it comes to a close now, we can look back on this winter period or this summer period if you're in the Southern Hemisphere. We're moving from that more introspective time to it being more externalized, where that expansion is now being reflected through our outward actions. This is, piece of evidence number one about why we are moving into a more forward momentum season for many of us, where a lot of us internally will feel more inclined to take aligned actions outwardly as we move into the true astrological new year, which begins this week. And as we have a Pisces new moon this week, and as Jupiter ended its retrograde last week, and Mercury will be ending its retrograde this week. So you see what I mean? Okay, piece of evidence. Okay, this Wednesday coming up on March 18th, we will have a Pisces new moon, and this will be happening at 28 degrees in this mutable water sign, the last sign of the zodiac. And this new moon is happening just a few days before the spring equinox. And so if you are someone who maybe has been feeling, I'm looking at my notes, if you're maybe somebody who's been feeling like maybe there's been a chapter in your life that's slowly dissolving, or maybe it feels confusing or even emotionally heavy in some ways, this might be a moment where things finally begin to make sense for many of us. I say this for a few reasons. For one, when we see a new moon in general, new moons signify the beginning of a new lunar cycle and the beginning of a new cycle within us. And it's a cycle that we will be feeling and experiencing over the next 6 months until we see a corresponding Pisces full moon, which signifies the end of that cycle. And so right now we're beginning a new cycle within this Pisces related area of our life, which I will be telling you what that area is in the All Signs Horoscope. And on top of that, with the moon, this astral body that's all about our emotions and our relationships, our intuition, and it being in this highly intuitive and highly imaginative sign of Pisces, this water sign that's also tied to our emotions, it indicates a period of time around the time of this new moon coming up this week on the 18th, where we might feel more inclined to be a little bit more emotionally introspective. We might have more experiences that ignite emotion within us. Depending on how we look at those emotions and what we do based off of those emotions can definitely help us to navigate this new cycle for us. Now, a bit more context with this new moon is that we see that the sun, moon, Mars, and Mercury, which will be retrograde at the time of this new moon, will all be in Pisces. So there's a lot of energy in a specific area of your chart that's tied to Pisces. This new moon is really notable in a lot of ways, okay? Because as you guys might already know, Saturn entered Aries, right? That was a big deal a few weeks ago. Saturn entered Aries. What does that mean? We've ended a 2+ year cycle of Saturn being in the sign of Pisces, and now it's starting a 2+ year cycle of it being in Aries, right? So was Neptune. Neptune was also transiting Pisces for years, many years. And Neptune is also now in Aries. And so this new moon is a big deal, not just because we have the sun, moon, Mercury, Mars, all in Aries, putting all of this energy and attention to the specific life area. But on top of that, y'all, Saturn and Neptune used to be in that area. There was this Saturnian energy in that life area in Pisces for you that brought in a bit more sternness, that introduced more experiences over the last few years that really called for you to level up and to be a little bit more mature and disciplined in a certain area of your life, right? And so considering that there's a new moon happening in this life area now, in the sign of Pisces, and we have Mercury there helping you to articulate these experiences. We have Mars there, this planet of, aggression and intensity, but also this planet of passion, drive, and a sense of action, energy. We have all of this energy there and the signification of a new chapter for many of us. And I think that for many of us, this indicates that we are finally feeling ready to take aligned steps based off of those Saturnian lessons when Saturn was in Pisces. We're finally feeling like we have been able to articulate or condense or put together a bit more some of those previous experiences. The last two transits include that this Friday, March 20th, on Friday, we have not only the spring equinox, but Mercury will be ending its retrograde in Pisces, y'all. So again, my other piece of evidence, boom, that we are having forward momentum for many of us. So first, spring equinox. Let's talk about that. Spring equinox, or the autumnal equinox, if you are in the southern hemisphere, happens when the sun enters the sign of Aries, indicating the start of Aries season. So happy birthday to all of my Aries friends. When the sun enters Aries, it marks the beginning of the Aries season, but it also marks the start of the new astrological new year, the new astrological new year. So on March 20th, this Friday, we have the true new year, the astrological new year. And so there's this new energetic shift where the sun is in a zodiac sign, a cardinal sign, imbuing this overarching energy of initiating things, starting things, being in action, because those are the overarching themes of Aries, right? So again, a piece of evidence for my case that we're jumpstarting things. And especially for us here on the Northern Hemisphere, that indicates that the spring season is starting for us. And that is when we see reflected in nature all around us, especially if you live in a place with 4 seasons, we see new baby leaves, we see new flowers, we see new baby animals. Nature is kickstarting. And then the last transit that I want to say also on Friday is that Mercury is ending its retrograde in Pisces. And Mercury rules over the signs Mercury rules over the signs Gemini and Virgo. So especially if you are a Gemini or a Virgo or a mutable sign, or if Mercury is your time lord, if you look to perfection years, you will likely feel this shift a bit more noticeably. But because Mercury rules all those things, and like I mentioned before, with any planet that goes retrograde, it indicates that whatever sort of experiences that it is tied to and rules over, those experiences become more internalized, right? So over, the last few weeks of Mercury being retrograde, this was a period where many of us were invited to be a little bit more reflective about our conduct, our verbal conduct, how we communicate. This is why they say, be sure to review your messages and your emails for typos and make sure to pause and see if you're misinterpreting things or if there's a miscommunication there before reacting. This is why some of that advice is given. All of that to say, Mercury is ending its retrograde. It's beginning its forward momentum through Pisces, and it will eventually enter Aries as well. And another piece of evidence for my case that we are having more forward momentum here. At the end of this video, I'm going to tell you my Mercury retrograde cautionary tale that contributed to why I was kind of MIA for a little bit. A part of it is some good news. A part of it is kind of like, oh my God. So be sure to listen to that. All right, y'all. With that said, let's go ahead and dive into this all signs horoscope. Last thing before we get into this, I do want to remind you, if you are someone who is constantly trying to figure out, okay, there's this transit happening, but what does it mean uniquely for my zodiac sign? I make digital astrology calendars custom to your zodiac sign. So not only do you get notifications on your phone as soon as a transit happens, but you also get a notification that tells you what it uniquely means for your zodiac sign. Be sure to check that out. Okay, with that said, let's dive into the All Signs horoscope. Hello to my Aries friends. So this Pisces new moon lands in your 12th house of reflection, of imagination, but also your inner world, what it means to heal. And Also, things that are a bit more hidden to you. So that might be the hidden subconscious aspect of yourself and becoming a bit more aware of that, or even hidden things or things that were obscured from your vision that maybe around the time of this new moon, you are able to better understand or notice. So these could be external secrets kept from you, or these could be things that you didn't even realize were there. And then maybe you go to an event or you have a conversation or you do something and you realize, oh my gosh, that was there all along. And for many of you guys, for my Aries rising specifically, over the last few years, you have been asked in a lot of different ways, especially because Saturn and Neptune were in your 12th house for years in Pisces. For many of you, you were asked to confront those subconscious patterns, emotional baggage, or things that you've kept private during that time. And so this lunation isn't asking you to necessarily rush forward. Like, okay, now it's a fresh start here. Saturn is out of your 12th house. Neptune is out of your 12th house. There's less of that sort of like pressure in a lot of ways. There's less of that Neptunian potential confusion. And so you can step forward with a lot more clarity, having had those lessons. It's not asking you to necessarily rush forward, but it's asking you to reflect, to sit with what you've learned about rest, about boundaries, about spiritual connection, and essentially process those things. Just pause for a second and ask, like, when it comes to my 12th house aspects of life, what have I learned over the last few years? And based off of that, this lunation is inviting you to imagine for a moment what it can look like for you to step forward in alignment with those lessons, step forward in alignment with what you truly want. And especially, oh my gosh, and just, I'm just reading, I'm really excited for you. I'm looking at my notes here, but also sitting with what you've learned. And the other aspect of this that's so cool, that is so on the nose, really highlighting that you all are entering a new chapter, is that Mercury is ending its retrograde in Pisces, also in your 12th house right now. Mercury is sitting right next to this new moon, along with Mars. That's giving you a bit of energy. And it's indicating this wrapping up with insights that may come through memories, dreams, or conversations that help things finally make sense. So around the time of this new moon, for many of you, unexpected perspective shifts may help you to see the past differently. And ultimately, this is preparing you for your own season ahead in a lot of ways. So I'm really excited for you guys, my Aries friends. And again, this new moon is this invitation to reflect on the lessons that you've experienced as it pertains to these 12th house themes of the subconscious, of things that were previously hidden or obscured from your understanding that now you understand. For some of you, this might be over the last few years, you realized that you were maybe subconsciously, unintentionally, not consciously self-sabotaging to stay in a certain state of life because that's more familiar to you. Even though you don't like it, it's familiar though. And on a subconscious level, our awareness, our subconscious always tries to keep us safe. For some of you, it might have been realizing that there were secrets that were being kept from you, or things that you didn't even realize that other people thought, and now you understand, or that, and now you better understand it. And based off of now that you're aware of it, what are you going to do with that information? Based off of how you better understand life and how to navigate certain things, what are you going to do with that information? A lot of you have been receiving a lot of spiritual downloads through your dreams. A lot of you guys have been strengthening your intuition and understanding the power of just sitting with an intuitive thought, or almost like a download or an inkling, and the power of, even if it's inconvenient, because oftentimes we can have these spiritual or subconscious, or not subconscious, but these spiritual or intuitive experiences that it's like, oh, I feel that, but man, like, I'm already in the middle of this. I'm already in the midst of this other thing, and it would be so inconvenient, or it would kind of mess things up if I spoke on this. What does it look like for you to actually live in alignment with that, exploring those things, because you're entering a new cycle. And based off of the way in which you take aligned steps right now, from the lessons that you experienced during this Mercury retrograde, but also, again, over the last 2+ years of Saturn and Neptune transiting this house in your chart, based off of the aligned actions that you take right now, you will notice tangibly the fruits of your labor in 6 months under the Pisces full moon that will be happening in 6 months. So I'm really excited for you. And that's my reading for you, my Aries friends. Hello to my Taurus friends. Okay, so this Pisces new moon and Mercury ending its retrograde, it's all happening in your 11th house of friendships, community, and in the long-term future that you are looking to build in your life, the long-term ways you are looking to progressively navigate your life, And it's bringing in this fresh new chapter for you in a lot of ways. And over the past few years, when it came to this life area of community, friendships, and your long-term vision, there was Saturn and Neptune were transiting this area of your life for the last 2+ years, Neptune even longer. And so this new moon, especially because Saturn and Neptune has left this area of your life. Saturn was bringing in a lot of experiences that were asking you to mature and to level up and to think more seriously about the responsibilities that you have within your friendship circles, within your community, taking more responsibility for the part that you play within those spaces. While Neptune was adding a bit of inspiration, aiding in your ability to utilize your imagination to create the life that you wanted in that space, but also bringing in a bit of fog sometimes, a bit of confusion sometimes. This new moon is a moment to reflect on what those experiences have taught you. And with Mercury ending its retrograde in Pisces as well, in your 11th house as well, we have the Sun, Moon, Mercury ending its retrograde, and Mars all in Pisces right now. Old friendships or conversations about your future could resurface around this time so that you can see them with a bit more clarity. And especially with Uranus also activating this moment in different ways, it's sextiling this lunation. There could be potential unexpected experiences that ultimately are tied to inviting you to look at this life area, again, of your social networks, your friendships, maybe your work, who are you collaborating with? Or your community, who are you collaborating with, those aspects of life. There could be potential unexpected experiences that invite you to reflect on the lessons that you've learned and how you can, especially over this new lunar cycle and the 6-month cycle, how you can take aligned steps based off of those lessons. So right now can be a really great time to not only journal and reflect, but also consider scripting. And scripting is essentially when you are pretending that based off of this area of life, you're living out the most optimal, best potential reality that you seek to have. You're pretending that you're already there and you're feeling it. And then you're writing in almost like a journal form as if you are living that out. So you're like, dear journal, oh my goodness, I am so grateful for this friend group I have. I feel so heard. I feel so inspired to support people there. You're listing out the things that you want as if you already have them. And it's really a powerful way to manifest, but it's a powerful way to get in the mindset of if I had everything that I wanted, what would my thinking process be? And how can I bridge that gap between today's thinking processes and that thinking processes and that energy, from today's energy and that energy, and how can I embody it? I'm really excited for you guys, my Taurus friends. But yeah, so that ultimately is my reading for you. And I will see you at the end for the journal prompt so that we can journal together. Hello to my Gemini friends. So this Pisces new moon, along with Mercury ending its retrograde, they're all happening in Pisces, and that they're all happening in your 10th house. I'm looking at my notes of your career, your reputation, your legacy, how essentially the 10th house is this house of peak visibility in life. And it's directly, its sister house directly opposed from it is the 4th house, which is your more private life. 4th house is your sort of inner circle and your private life. 10th house is your outer circle, your outer reputation, and your public life. And so considering that, we have this new moon here bringing in this fresh start, this new 6-month cycle, and Mercury ending its retrograde, offering a lot more clarity, where you will likely feel a lot more inclined to finally find the words to articulate how you've been feeling in this life area. We also, that's essentially what we'll be experiencing, but it's important to understand, as I mentioned before in the overview of this transit, Saturn and Neptune were transiting Pisces and transiting your 10th house for over 2 years. Neptune for more years than that. And so there were the Saturnian and Neptunian and sort of overarching themes of experiences in the 10th house, where especially over the last 2 years, you were invited in various different ways to become more serious, more disciplined, and take more responsibility for the part that you played when it came to your reputation, when it came to likely your career path, your and your reputation and the ways in which you share with the world your experiences to help the world. And so because over the last few years, you were having a bit more of that sort of heavier energy, now that the new moon and Mercury are in that exact same life area, it's kind of like they're coming in behind Saturn and Neptune, and they're kind of shining this light over those experiences. And this new moon is inviting you not to hit the ground running and immediately be in action necessarily. Although, we are starting a new astrological new year where it is reflected that this is a time where if you do want to kickstart things, it is energetically supported. This lunation is inviting you to reflect on everything you've learned about your ambitions and about the power of taking responsibility for those ambitions. And Mercury retrograde is here, and it suggests old professional conversations or ideas may return for reconsideration right now. With Mercury ending its retrograde, it's indicating this sort of forward momentum where in this life area, where maybe for some of you, it has felt a bit arduous, or like you're kind of like speaking to a wall, or it's like you started something, but it seems like there's so many mishaps tied to it. There's going to be a lot more forward momentum coming forward when it comes to your 10th house life area of your reputation, your career, and the life direction that you want to take in your reputation. So rather than rushing into action, this new moon is inviting you to sit with what your experiences have taught you, because a new version of your future may emerge through these reflections for many of you. You might finally find the words or connect the dots or kind of finally find the puzzle pieces that clearly help you understand the aligned actions that you can take moving forward, aligned with these lessons, so that you can navigate forward with this experience, with this wisdom to inform your path. And so that is my reading for you, my Gemini friends. I think that right now it can be very helpful to seek some mentorship or dive into literature to better understand maybe your career path or the direction that you want to take when it comes to pouring into the wisdom that you are utilizing to essentially help society or help the broader world that's tied back to your reputation. But yeah, that's my reading for you. I hope that was a good reading, and I hope that it resonated with you, and I will see you at the end for the journal prompts. Hello to my Cancer friends. So this Pisces new moon and this Pisces Mercury retrograde that is ending this week are both taking place in your 9th house of higher learning, education, deep research, also your spiritual beliefs, and all things expansion of your awareness. Now, the 9th house is a very Jupiter-coded house in a lot of ways, in that it has to do with all things expansion. And, the 9th house is directly opposite the 3rd house, and it's this sort of education access, whereas the 3rd house is also about information and learning. It's more short-term, quick, fun facts. The 9th house is about that deeper research and, again, higher learning, and also your deeper, more consistent, routine, even ritualistic relationship with your spiritual connection, your connection to the divine, to this dimension and the next, this time, this moment in time, and all others. And again, your connection to something beyond the physical realm. And so for many of you guys, a piece of context, like I mentioned before at the beginning of this video, Saturn and Neptune were transiting Pisces and thus transiting your 9th house for over 2 years. And they just left Pisces and entered Aries just a few weeks ago. And so so now imagine you have this life area where Saturn and Neptune are bringing in their Saturnian and Neptunian energy, the Saturn energy of, especially for your ninth house life theme. So in this life area of spiritual beliefs, of education, of higher learning, of deeper research, of long distance travel is another ninth house related life area, of traveling in general, and an expansion of your understanding of things, learning, being the student in a lot of ways, seeking, or even educating. Saturn and Neptune were there bringing in these Saturnian themes for Saturn of, when are you going to be a little bit more serious and take more responsibility for this life area? There was a bit more heaviness when Saturn was transiting this area, bringing in these Saturnian lessons. And Neptune was there also bringing in these Neptunian lessons of striking a balance between being delusional as a form of being optimistic and aligning your actions with your vision for your life, but also striking a balance between that and maybe the more Neptunian, I don't know if that's a word, these Neptune themes of maybe being avoidant, using your imagination as escapism, and striking that balance, right? There were a lot of heavier life lessons when they were transiting that, right? And so now they're gone. And now the new moon is here, bringing in this illumination around those lessons. What were the lessons that you experienced when it came to long distance travel, when it came to education, when it came to your relationship with your spiritual, religious, even political beliefs? What are some of those lessons that you experienced? And this new moon is asking you and inviting you to reflect on those things, and it invites you to pause and reflect on how your perspective has evolved. And on top of that, Mercury is also there in Pisces. You have the sun, moon, Mercury, and Mars, all in Pisces right now. There's a lot of energy here where you're invited to take aligned actions, that being that Mars energy, but also the mercurial energy, finally put to words a lot of these experiences. Mercury retrograde here could also bring, around the time of this new moon, it could bring back old ideas, teachers, or conversations that help you to understand those lessons more deeply. And, Uranus is also more lightly involved with this new moon in a lot of ways. And Uranus is the planet of unexpected shifts and changes. So for many of you, you're entering this new chapter where, especially around the time of this new moon, you might have some experiences that invite you to reflect on any sort of lessons that you've had as it pertains to these ninth house themes. And based off of these lessons, how do you want to move forward into this new chapter with more educated decisions? You're taking a more educated approach to this life area. And how does that inform how you want to move forward? Because based off of this new moon in Pisces, it starts a new cycle for you, a new 6-month cycle where you will see the fruits of your labor or the ramifications of them very noticeably under the Pisces full moon that will happen in 6 months. And so that is my reading for you, my Cancer friends. I'm really excited for you. And I think right now it can be very helpful to pause and reflect on, again, what are the things that you have learned, and whether it pertains to your political views, your philosophical views. What have you learned from others? What have you taught others? And there's a new chapter that's emerging here and inviting you to reflect so that you can start from an educated space. And with that said, I will see you at the end for the journal prompts. And that's my reading for you. Hello to my Leo friends. So this Pisces new moon, along with Mercury ending its retrograde, are along with this new moon as well, and Mars. So we have Sun, Moon, Mars, and Mercury all in Pisces. It's going to be activating this 8th house, bringing in reflections around, and I'm looking at my notes, things that pertain to intimacy, shared resources, and emotional transformation. And I say that because the 8th house, especially in traditional astrology, it's seen as the house that involves all things that are essentially the ramification of 7th house marriage or 7th house contracts. So what comes after marriage? What comes after contracts? What comes after you start a relationship? Like the 8th house it pertains to those things, but it's kind of like what are the long-term ramifications of that? So for example, you start a relationship. That means that in the 8th house, it's about long-term relationships. You created a contract. The 8th house is about what does that contract entail? And the 8th house is also a part of the money axis. And it's directly across from the 2nd house that has to do with your income and your job and how you personally generate income for yourself. Whereas the 8th house is about other people's income, other people's money, and how you maybe receive or give to other people this exchange of monetary value in a lot of ways. So for many of you, if you're like me, maybe you run a business that could pertain to your customers. Maybe you have a contract with people, a financial contract, where it's like you went into a contract with people to buy a house with them, or you went into a contract with a business partner, or you went into a contract to get a mortgage or an auto loan. These are the type of things that are tied to the 8th house. Or you entered a more emotional relationship contract, maybe a literal one, as in marriage, or a figurative one. Think about the unspoken sort of contracts that are involved in relationships, and these long-term relationships. Think about the unspoken relationship contracts in family dynamics. We all have agreed to certain family dynamics. Some people don't like those dynamics, and some people do. Think about friendship dynamics. We've all entered this social contract. We're all going to show up to this club meeting every week or every month, and we're all going to be supportive of each other in different ways, and we're going to maintain this sort of social dynamic. All of that to say, over the last 2+ years, Saturn was transiting this 8th house area of financial contracts, social contracts, relationship contracts, and the ramifications of those things for better or worse. So let's say, it could involve things like codependence, that can show up in long-term relationships, or more interdependence that can show up in long-term relationships as well. How you collaborate and depend on each other. Is there more interdependence in a healthy way, or codependence maybe? Overly reliant on one another? These are all of the themes that are tied to the 8th house, right? And so Saturn was transiting your 8th house for 2+ years, bringing in these Saturnian themes of Saturn coming in, being the strict teacher, and asking you, as it pertains to these 8th house themes, how are you taking responsibility for the part that you play? How are you stepping up to the plate of life when there is a hiccup or a mishap? And how do you step up to the plate? Maybe it's outside of your comfort zone, but if you leave that comfort zone, you are expanding your comfort zone and you are growing. And you're becoming more mature. That's Saturn. Those are the Saturn themes. And these Saturn themes often can come through potential mishaps, because Saturn is considered the strict teacher, right? So there was this more heavy energy in your 8th house for 2+ years. And then Neptune was in there too, bringing in potential confusion and all of this stuff, right? But both Saturn and Neptune have left your 8th house. They're now in Aries. And so with that context, you have this new moon in Pisces, in your 8th house, and Mercury ending its retrograde, both signifying a new chapter where this new moon is asking you to not immediately be in action, not immediately start something new as it pertains to your 8th house, but reflect, pause, bring in these Piscean themes of reflection, introspection, bring in these new moon themes of drawing your energy back to yourself for a moment and reflecting on the previous lunar cycle, reflecting on the previous maybe 2+ years of Saturn being in these areas, and ask yourself, what were the lessons that you learned? What were the challenges and the underlying lessons there? And how can you take aligned steps in this new lunar cycle basically making more educated decisions on how you'd like to conduct yourself as it pertains to your long-term relationships, as it pertains to your financial contracts or dealings when it comes to other people, other people's money, collaborating with people, and either being literally contractually tied to people in a financial sense, maybe in a literal marriage, or figuratively, emotionally, energetically in contract with people in a more social and emotional way. This 8th house is also the house of sort of soul contracts. And these are the overarching themes that this lunation is doing. This lunation, I'm looking at my notes, marks the beginning of a new chapter. But the invitation right now is reflection rather than action. With Mercury retrograde here as well, past conversations around things like finances or vulnerability may resurface so that you can better process them differently. And you might even have unexpected realizations or experiences that could help you to see a more shared or interconnected situation in a completely new light. So I'm really, really excited for you guys, my Leo friends, because there's a lot of deeper excavation and work that you have already done. Honestly, you've already done a lot of it. This new moon is an invitation to reflect on those things and reflect how, based off of this, how can you take aligned action? You know, what comes to mind is how there are people who I look up to so much. And a common thing that a lot of them have said is that they have grown not just from reading self-help books and reading these books that help them to grow in a lot of ways and understand them and how to conduct themselves and all this stuff. But an overarching thing that a lot of them have shared is that they have, especially after a chapter or a moment in the book that's been like, oh my gosh, wow, that is so poignant. They intentionally pause to journal about it, to reflect on it, and to ask themselves, how can I take aligned action based off of this lesson? Because oftentimes we are getting so many valuable lessons in our life, and we oftentimes even pause and we're like, wow, that is a lesson. But sometimes we don't always actually pause to think about how we can live in alignment with what we have learned. And this new moon is all about that. And Mercury ending its retrograde in your 8th house, my Leo friends, is all about, it's indicating this fresh start for you where you're finally able to articulate some of the potential retrograde related experiences that you had in your 8th house as well. And you're finally able to connect the dots in a lot of ways. Mercury rules over our thinking processes, the analytical part of our minds, and how we learn through communication and having conversations with people and educating others, but also being educated from others. So I'm really excited for you, my Leo friends. And that is my reading for you. Okay, I'll see you at the end for the journal prompts and my little catch up of my own Mercury retrograde related experiences. Hello to my Virgo friends. So this Pisces new moon and Mercury retrograde are breathing in an air of just this fresh air. They're blowing in this fresh energy for you as it pertains to your more interpersonal relationships, your relationships of the heart, partnerships. And it's breathing in an air like this fresh air and this fresh start when it comes to justice, the scales of justice, and this feeling of even like balance and equitability within your relationships. And for a bit of context, over the last 2+ years, Saturn and Neptune were transiting your 7th house of relationships. So those Saturnian themes, you know, Saturn is seen as a strict teacher in astrology, right? This planet of giving you important life lessons that push you to mature and to grow, but oftentimes it's through more challenging experiences that feel like, again, this strict teacher has come in and is like, hey, I feel like you're not really learning your lesson here. So I'm going to put in a situation that kind of like forces you to be like, oh, that if I don't take responsibility for this, if I don't step up to the plate or mature in this way or have a little bit more restriction and maturation in this life area, it's going to be real uncomfy. And so we have that a bit more heavier Saturnian energy, and Neptune there even bringing in a bit of potential confusion for 2+ years in your 7th house. So impacting your relationships, your partnerships, your sense of equitability and balance and equal energy exchange as it pertains to your relationships. You had a lot of lessons there. And the good news is Saturn and Neptune ended their transit in your in that house, you know, in your 7th house. They left. They're both in Aries now. They have left that life area, right? And so now we have this new moon. We have Mercury ending its retrograde in your 7th house of relationships, signifying a new chapter. And this new moon is not necessarily asking you to hit the ground running and kickstart things and being like, all right, I'm done with that. Now I'm going to go do this new thing. Obviously, if you feel called to do that, do it. But this new moon signifies this time where you are invited to pause and reflect on those lessons, those 2+ year Saturnian and Neptunian lessons. I don't even know if Neptunian is a word, but you guys get what I mean. What were the lessons that you experienced as it pertained to your relationships? Maybe you're married, maybe you're dating, maybe you have a boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever. What were some of the experiences, some of the potential challenges or things that were demystified over the course of the last 2+ years as it pertained to your relationships? And based off of that, this new moon is inviting you to pause and lean into these Piscean themes, because it's a new moon, a Pisces new moon, of drawing your energy back to yourself, reflecting, sitting in silence for a moment and asking yourself, what were these lessons? And then again, leaning into these new moon themes, then asking yourself, how can you take aligned actions? How can you make more educated decisions based off of those relationship lessons? Okay. I'm so excited for you, my Virgo friends, because yeah, man, like there's a huge opportunity here for you. And the last thing I will say is that on top of all of this, Mercury, the planet of information exchange, conversation, putting words to your experiences, the more analytical aspect of yourself, that's also happening in your 7th house of relationships, equitability, energetic exchange. And it's also signifying this breath of fresh air where you're finally finding the words to articulate a lot of this stuff because the retrograde is ending. And there's this forward momentum happening. And so right now, a few days leading up to following this new moon, you might have some experiences, they might even be unexpected, where you might have some aha moments where you're connecting the dots and you're finally realizing, oh my goodness, this experience is tied to something that I've been noticing over the last few years. And actually, if I finally have the words to say to my partner or to speak to myself that actually, man, this is actually the underlying lesson here, or this is the underlying sort of theme that's highlighting my true nature, or what actually will work better for me if I kind of do this instead of that, And my invitation to you is to pay attention to those lessons and also journal, not just to reflect, but also imagine, take a moment, lean into these Piscean themes of imagination and even manifestation, and journal as if, practice scripting, journal as if you already have what you want and what that might look like, and align yourself with that, because there's such a huge portal here for you that I'm really excited for. But that is my reading for you, my Virgo friends. I will see you at the end for the journal prompt, so we can journal together to reflect about these new moon themes. Hello to my Libra friends. So this Pisces new moon, along with Mercury ending its retrograde and Mars, will all be happening in your 6th house of your work, your life structures and routines, and essentially your healthy habits that sort of manifest. You see the sort of fruits of your labor when it comes to your health related sort of habits, whether it be like your nutrition, your physical health, physical activity, getting sunlight, all that stuff, how it is connected to your actual output. So what I mean by that is the 6th house is, especially in traditional astrology, it's really the house of labor. In honestly, like because I study Hellenistic astrology, and it's tied back to ancient Egyptian astrology, Mesopotamian astrology. And back then, the 6th house was also considered the house, like if somebody was looking to understand if you might have slaves or be a slave, there, like this. So that's what I mean by like the 6th house being the house of labor. So I'm not saying that it has to do with slavery. Obviously, that does not pertain to us. Thankfully, we are very blessed to live in an era where it doesn't pertain to that. But I don't even know why I got into that, y'all. It's just like, that's a rough topic, right? But I'm just giving you the historical context of how the 6th house is so much about the labor that you give and receive, whether it is the labor that you give in your household, whether you have roommates or you live with other people or it's yourself. It's like the labor that you put into the chores that are done, or being a caretaker, that labor, or the labor that is put into your job, or the labor that you receive from people who you have hired or that work with you. It's all about that. I'd like to describe that kind of being the surface level, right? And then But really, we're going underneath that. What are your routines, your structures, the ways in which you keep things organized? What is your relationship with labor, with work, with even consistency in different ways? What's your relationship with that, right? And then another layer underneath that, I'm getting a delivery, so I'm like looking out the window. And then another layer underneath that goes back to health. How are we nourishing our bodies? How are we taking care of ourselves? What is our sleep hygiene? What's our nutritional health? What is, our overall health in different ways, and so that's the root of it, right? And if on that foundational level, we are not, we're not really doing those things that we know we need to do, then that can manifest as impacting our workflow, our routines, our day-to-day things, our sense of organization and feeling grounded. And then thus that can impact our labor and our actions and the work that we give to others or that we receive, right? So those are all sixth house themes. And that's a bit of context from a traditional astrology perspective as to why in modern astrology, sixth house is often associated with things like daily routine, our work life, and our health habits. Okay. So with all of that said, with that context, considering that the new moon and Mercury ending its retrograde is all happening in Pisces in your sixth house, that is tied to those life areas. A bit of context here is that Saturn and Neptune were transiting your sixth house of labor, of work, of your routines, your relationship with those things, of your health, and the things that you do to pour into yourself to be healthy. Saturn and Neptune were transiting that area of your life. They were in your sixth house for 2+ years, Neptune for even longer, right? So you had these overarching Saturnian themes for years and Neptune themes for years, where there were those Saturnian themes of having Saturn-related experiences that pushed you to mature, that pushed you to be more restrictive and more disciplined when it came to your labor, with your work, with your routine and your structures and your sort of schedules that allowed you to have sustainable work and labor. And also, so you had these Saturnian themes that were kind of heavy, where you had these more serious life lessons that were constantly pushing you and inviting you through oftentimes not always the happiest experiences that were asking of you to mature and be more restrictive and step outside of your comfort zone in order to grow as it pertained to those life areas, right? And Neptune was there to bring in a bit of confusion, but also a bit of optimism and imagination of what could be when it came to these life areas. And now the good news is that Saturn and Neptune have left your sixth house of Pisces. They're gone. That's good news in a lot of ways, leaving behind the lessons from those cycles, right? And so with that context, this new moon and Mercury ending its retrograde are indications that a new chapter, a breath of fresh air, a new door is opening for you to step into a new chapter, a new cycle as it pertains to the sixth house areas of your daily routines, your work life, and your health habits. And this is a beautiful opportunity in a lot of ways because this lunation is inviting you to not necessarily immediately be in action, but to pause and lean into these Pisces new moon related themes, lean into these themes of reflection on how those lessons from the previous years, have shaped your current lifestyle. How those lessons, what were those lessons? And how can you take aligned actions based off of what you've learned over these previous years when it comes to, like for a lot of you, Saturn in your sixth house screams for many of you burnout. It screams for many of you burnout that pushes you to learn lessons around how to set better boundaries with your work-life balance. Neptune in the sixth house, it screams for many of you having a sense of disillusionment around feeling like your actions didn't always equate to the results that you wanted, that just because you exerted yourself did not automatically equate to the idea or the end result that you thought would happen. And so there's this sense of disillusionment or even confusion around how to navigate, how to make sure that you're taking the most effective actions and offering the most effective, sort of labor and work and routine And even potential confusion around boundaries with work-life balance that leaves it feeling like there's blurred lines there. Those were some of the experiences that you might have had when Saturn and Neptune were transiting your sixth house. And now that they're out of there, this Pisces lunation is inviting you to pause and reflect on the lessons that were underlying those experiences. Were some of the lessons like, oh my gosh, I need to set boundaries, or I need to explore why I feel the need to overextend myself, or I need to pause and reflect on what is the root behind how I found myself in these predicaments, and how can I take, again, make more educated decisions and take aligned actions based off of these lessons so that I find more work-life balance, or so that maybe you are a manager and you were receiving labor from others. How can you better navigate that? Or based off of these lessons, how can I focus more on my nutrition and my sleep hygiene so that I am not pouring from an empty cup, but I am allowing my full cup to overflow and then still be able to give to others because I poured into myself first. These are some of the themes that you might realize that might be illuminated right now through this new moon. And with Mercury retrograde here, you may also revisit conversations or patterns related to work and your well-being. You might finally find the words, be able to articulate and understand something, because Mercury is bringing in this forward momentum after a period of a bit of stagnation in this life area. And so with all of that said, you might have unexpected realizations around the time of this new moon. I'm looking at my notes that could shift how you approach things like productivity, reminding you that balance and sustainability matter more than constant output, And I feel like this transit, it's screaming that phrase, working smarter, not harder. Working smarter, not harder. How can I work smarter and not harder? Think about that. Think about that. Honestly, journal. Like literally, that's your prompt, y'all. If I were to think smarter and not harder when it came to my relationship with work, routines, my physical health, and how it impacts all of those things. If I were to work smarter and not harder, what would that look like? What comes to mind for you guys, my Libra friends, this is my last thing, is I saw this video that was essentially, they were like, my friend told me that, I was telling my friend that I want to be vegan, but I love bacon. And my friend said, okay, just be vegan, but eat bacon. And how that can be applied to most of your life. How oftentimes we want to do something, but we feel like we need to be perfectionists about it. And if we aren't, then we can't get it done the right way. And I invite you to pause and ask that when it comes to working smarter and not harder. Maybe that there are certain ways you can conduct yourself or do things slightly differently that could actually drastically help you. But you're like, oh, I knew I want to do it, but it needs to be done in this very specific way. And I'm inviting you to pause and ask about that, and if that's hindering your ability to work smarter and not harder. That is my reading for you, my Libra friends. I will see you at the end for the journal prompts. Please comment if this resonated with you. And I'll see you at the end for the journal prompts. Okay. Hello to my Scorpio friends. So this Pisces new moon, along with Mercury ending its retrograde, along with Mars also being there, it's all happening in Pisces, and it's all happening in your fifth house, introducing and indicating a new chapter for you when it comes to creativity, joy, romance, exploring the aesthetics of things, and your self-expression. Your fifth house is the house of aha moments. Have you ever had an experience where you're like, oh my gosh, I feel so inspired. Oh my goodness, I didn't realize, that was a path I could take, and now I know. Or wow, especially through pieces of art or anything like that, where you're you have these aha moments of realizing, I really want to dive deeper into this sort of artistic or creative expression. The fifth house is also the house of babies and children. Again, another form of creation, right? And so all of that to say, it's indicating a new chapter for you. But a bit of context here is that over the last 2+ years, Saturn and Neptune were in Pisces. Thus, they were transiting your fifth house of creativity, joy, wonder, sparks of curiosity, and your creative expression, your inner child. And there were a lot of Saturnian, Neptunian themes that were pretty persistent over the last 2+ years in this area of life. And as you know, Saturn is considered the strict teacher. So for 2+ years, you might have had some experiences where Saturn was coming in and where you might have felt a bit of heavier energy in this life area of feeling like, man, I really need to lock in, or feeling this pressure to kind of mature, grow, be a little bit more restricted when it came to allowing your energy to be distributed in all these other areas, maybe even pouring to other people's creative things, but not always your own. And there were these lessons there. And the good news is that Saturn and Neptune have left. Oh, last thing, Neptune was there too, right? So over the last few years, you might have felt a sense of disillusionment, or it felt like the path wasn't fully clear for you when it came to your creative path in different ways. And creativity, when I'm not talking about like, oh, you need to make this a career path or anything like that. I'm talking about hobbies. I'm talking about the sense, how did it feel when you were a kid and you were in the backyard, or you were sitting on the grass, or you were just doing something for the sake of doing it? And it felt good. If you want to, make that a more of a career path, that can pertain to it as well. But I'm talking about that core sense of unadulterated, unfiltered, pure, just inspiration, right? And so over the last few years, with Saturn and Neptune transiting your 5th house of creativity, there was a bit of heaviness there, or even some Neptunian sort of confusion or disillusionment when it came to those aspects of your 5th house, aspects of your life of creativity, joy, romance, and self-expression. And the good news is both of them have left the sign of Pisces. They've left your 5th house. And now we have this new moon, this new chapter in your 5th house. And we have Mercury ending its retrograde in your 5th house, both indicating this breath of fresh air and this opportunity to start anew when it comes to these 5th house life areas. And so this lunation is asking you to reflect on how your relationship to creativity and to pleasure has potentially evolved over the last few years. How has it evolved? What are the lessons that you have learned from those potential challenges when it came to these life areas? And this new moon is inviting you to lean into these sort of Pisces new moon themes of reflection, drawing your energy back to yourself, envisioning what can life be like when you take aligned action, make more educated decisions based off of the lessons that you had, And then with Mercury ending its retrograde also in your 5th house, it could also bring in past creative ideas or romantic connections or unfinished passions back into focus for you. And I'm so excited for you guys. Like literally over the last few weeks, because Mercury is ending its retrograde, you might have been reminded of something from your past as it pertains to your creativity or your relationship with it, as an invitation to pause, process it. That way you can then end this retrograde moving forward, continuing on your path now that you took a moment to pause and reflect, moving on your path with forward momentum for this new lunar cycle. And as you guys might already know, you will see the fruits of your labor based off of the decisions that you make around this time as it pertains to this in 6 months under the Pisces full moon. And so around the time of this new moon, you might have some experiences that really invite you to pause and reflect and also look to the future. And I'm so excited for you. And I think that something unexpected may spark inspiration and help you to see what truly lights you up. And I'm so excited for you. I'm so excited for you, my Scorpio friends. So that's my reading for you. I will see you at the end for the journal prompts. And I'm sending you my love. I'm excited for this new chapter for you. Hello to my Sagittarius friends. So this new moon and Mercury retrograde, both in Pisces, are happening in your 4th house of your inner circle, your private life, and the more formative years, and the people that have been a part of your more formative years and formative life. So think about your family, think about people who have played a role in, again, sculpting you into who you are in a lot of ways. The 4th house is directly opposite the 10th house. The 10th house is your outer circle, your reputation, peak visibility in life, whereas the 4th house is peak privacy, what people see the least. And instead of your outer circle, it's your inner circle. And the 4th house also has to do with, as it pertains to your private life, think about your home life, your immediate sort of sanctuary, where you go to retreat, and what makes you feel stable, secure, and protected. What makes you feel grounded in your own home. And with a bit of context here, Saturn and Neptune were transiting your fourth house in the sign of Pisces for over 2 years, with Neptune transiting it even longer. So for over 2 years, you had more Saturnian themes in your fourth house, and they may have shaped this area of life over the past few years, asking you to redefine what stability and belonging might have meant to you, asking you to maybe mature or invite a bit more restriction, and sort of finally doing that thing that maybe you needed to do, but you were avoiding it, but that now that you have done it, or that if you do it, you will actually grow as a person. And by stepping outside of your comfort zone, you're actually expanding your comfort zone, right? You're growing. And these are some of the themes that might have come from Saturn and Neptune being there. And for some of you, there might have been more of a serious note to this fourth house area of your private life and your history. And maybe that manifested as familial sort of issues or disagreements or shifts within the family system. There might have been changes in some way. Maybe a family member moves. Maybe you move away from family. Maybe there's somebody who passes away. Maybe there's a shift, just a change there, or something having to do with you growing in some way. Maybe not growing away from who you were, but growing within that context and your relationship with your past. And so there might have been that sort of maybe heavier Saturnian energy there. Maybe there could have been themes of disillusionment, or even a bit of fogginess in terms of what your path forward has been within this life area because of Neptune being there. But the good news is Saturn and Neptune have left your fourth house. They are now in Aries. They're no longer in Pisces. And as of right now, as of this week, the moon will be having a new moon, a new lunar cycle in your fourth house, and Mercury will be ending its retrograde in your fourth house, both indicating this new breath of fresh air, this new chapter, this new opportunity to step forward into a new chapter for yourself, and leaning into these Piscean new moon themes of drawing our energy back to ourselves, being reflective of these 2+ year lessons within these fourth house themes of our home life, our family dynamics, our formative year history, and our emotional foundations, what makes us feel safe. But with that context, with Mercury ending its retrograde in your fourth house, it definitely screams sort of like, especially over the last few weeks since Mercury's ending its retrograde, you might have had an uptick in memories or even sentimental experiences or reminders of your past in some way that, for better or worse, that ultimately invited you to reflect on it. And with Mercury ending its retrograde this week, in combination with this new moon, they both are indicating this forward momentum where there's a lot more clarity, and Mercury is lending itself to you being able to finally find the words and articulate a lot of these lessons that happened in your fourth house over the last few years, and also the lessons from Mercury retrograde that's ending right now. So especially around the time of this new moon, you might experience potentially even unexpected, I'm looking at my notes, shifts in your understanding of what home really means to you, what family dynamics and more interpersonal, more private dynamics, what that means to you, and what safety, security, and peace of mind within your own home, what does that mean to you? What does that look like? It can be helpful to reflect on those things. And again, reflect on the lessons that you might have experienced over the last few years of Saturn and Neptune in this house, so that for this new lunar cycle, you can step into it with a new perspective and making more educated decisions based off of your experiences. And considering that we also have the Spring Equinox, there's just a really great fresh start happening for you, my Capricorn friends. So I'm really excited for you, or not Capricorn, I'm sorry, my Sagittarius friends. And that concludes my reading for you. I will see you at the end for the journal prompts. And hello, I'm just gathering my notes. Hello to my Capricorn friends. So this Pisces new moon, along with this Pisces Mercury retrograde that's now ending, are both happening in your third house of communication, of your mindset, the way that you process information, and the way that you also, again, like communicate, so provide information. And think about socializing, and learning from people and fun facts, but namely how you communicate. And especially because Mercury was retrograde, Mercury especially was retrograde in Pisces, in your third house of communication. Whoa. I don't know if you heard that, but there's a lot of wind where I am. And there was a bunch of wind. Okay. Confirmation, air sign, Mercury, anyway, making weird connections. But all of that to say, this is a life area that this Mercury retrograde is ending in Pisces. And this is the life area that has been impacted by Mercury retrograde, where it will be ending. So where you will find a lot more clarity and finally find, maybe even specifically for you guys, more easily find the words to articulate what maybe has been going on internally. Now, with that context, over the last 2+ years, Saturn and Neptune were in Pisces, transiting your third house of communication, of the ways in which you learn and process information. And so essentially in that area of your life for 2+ years, and for Neptune, even longer than that, in your life, there were some heavier themes where Saturn, considered the strict teacher in astrology, that's tied to ushering in important lessons that push you to mature, introduce often through tough lessons, because it's a strict teacher, introduces experiences that really push you to mature, push you to find a bit more restriction and self-control and maturity in certain areas of your life. And for you, that involved your third house. So there was this heavier energy there introducing, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, y'all, I had an alarm. And so there were these lessons, there might've been this air of this heavier feeling for many of you for multiple years as it pertained to this area of life in the third house, where there was an emphasis on the weight of your words. There was an emphasis on the importance of communicating properly, clearly, not miscommunicating, potentially even life lessons or experiences that highlighted things like gossip or things like misinformation, and you being at the other end of misinformation, misunderstanding something or being told something mistruth, or you being on the other end of that, maybe misspeaking in some way, intentionally or unintentionally. But ultimately there were Saturnian lessons there highlighting the importance of you maturing when it came to these third house life areas, right? And so the good news is that Saturn and Neptune have now left your third house. They're now in Aries. And what's happening now in your third house in Pisces is this Mercury retrograde ending and a Pisces new moon, signifying this breath of fresh air, this new chapter, a new cycle, a new opportunity for you to approach these life areas from a more informed perspective. And this new moon is not asking you to hit the ground running, right? New moons are more so about reflection, drawing your energy back to yourself and pausing to better understand what were the lessons behind the last 2+ years of Saturn and Neptune transiting my third house of communication, information exchange, socializing, and my social networks. What were my lessons, and how can I make more educated decisions to now step into this new lunar cycle and be with more aligned actions in alignment with those lessons and in more alignment with the life that I want to lead within this life area. And with Mercury retrograde here, especially over the last few months with Mercury retrograde in Pisces in your third house, it might have brought back old conversations or even things that were written down where you end up having to circle back to it to either clarify it or seek clarification or re-explain something, or somebody else is re-explaining something. It's like, hey, we need to get back to this actually. So over the last few weeks, and now that Mercury's ending its retrograde in your third house, in addition to in tandem within the same week as this new moon, it's indicating that for many of you guys, you might start to finally find the words to articulate what's going on in your inner world. Articulate to yourself, what are these lessons that I've been learning, and how can I, again, like take aligned steps based off of them so I don't repeat these mistakes or unknowingly like fall into the same sort of things that I did before. For many of you, you might not have done anything wrong, but it was more so that you misinterpreted something, or you trusted someone who wasn't actually speaking the truth, or there was disillusionment going on. Neptune in your third house screams misinformation, lies, maybe even gossip, and not at your hands. Maybe you're not doing that, but maybe other people. And maybe it's not always this illusion that's being presented in a negative way. Sometimes it's like when you want to believe something is true. And on the other side of that coin, Neptune in the third house has a lot to do, can also show up as you speaking into existence what you imagine. Neptune is all about the imagination, the ether, things beyond the physical realm that lead up to the physical manifestation, right? And so now that Neptune and Saturn have left your third house, now Mercury is there, and there's this new moon offering you this invitation, this doorway into being able to approach these third house themes in a more aligned way, a more educated way. So around the time of this new moon, you might have more surprising insights, downloads, or even insightful interactions that could help you to see a situation in a completely new way, or to help you to step into this new chapter in a more empowered way. So that is my reading for you, my Capricorn friends. And yeah, okay, I will see you at the end for your journal prompts, and I'm rooting for you. Hello to my Aquarius friends. So for you guys, this Pisces new moon, along with this Pisces Mercury retrograde that is ending, are both happening in your second house of your personal income, your finances, and your sense of stability when it comes to financial stability, but also self-worth stability, your own self-worth, and how stable you feel and grounded you feel in who you are and your inherent values. And so this new moon and Mercury ending its retrograde in Pisces for you is indicating this breath of fresh air, this new chapter, this portal that is open for you, where around the time of this new moon, you might finally connect certain dots if you choose to pause and reflect on how you can step forward into this new chapter, making more educated decisions based off of your reflections of previous lessons learned as it pertains to second house life themes. So as it pertains to your financial health, your financial literacy, your job, your sense of stability, and again, your self-worth. When it comes to the second and the eighth house, a lot of times there's an overemphasis in modern astrology on the financial side of it. But the other side of the coin is our relationships and our sense of love. And so the second house is personal finance, personal financial dealings, personal material things that we own and obtain, and the means that we need in order to live our lives. That's the second house. And it's on this financial access with the eighth house. That's other people's money and other people's things. And the other side of that coin for both of these houses is the second house is about your stuff and your things and your money. Eighth house is about other people's stuff, other people's things, other people's money. But on the other side of the coin, the second house is about your self-worth, your self-love, your relationship with your personal values. Whereas the eighth house is other people's love for you, your relationship with other people, other people's value systems and how you work with them, right? And so with that context, those are the themes of the second house. It's about you and your relationship with that outer world of material things, finances, your value systems. And also it's about you when it comes to your relationship with your own self-image and self-worth and how you conduct yourself based off of that. And so all of that to say, you're having this fresh start, right? But a bit of context here is that for the last 2+ years, Saturn and Neptune were transiting your second house of finances, your second house of material wealth, of material gain, your material possessions, your value systems, all of this stuff, right? But also your interpersonal self-worth. And Saturn is pretty serious. There's a bit of heavier energy there. Saturn is considered the strict teacher. It's when it was transiting your second house over the last 2+ years, it was bringing in these themes of sometimes tough lessons that invited you to pause and ask yourself, how can you mature? How can you bring in more restriction and maturity when it comes to your financial literacy and when it comes to your money? Maybe through financial challenges, maybe through various things, you learned a lot about ways to grow and create more stability when it came to not only your financial life, your material life, but also your relationship with yourself and your own self-image and your value systems, right? And so that was happening for 2+ years. And then Neptune was there, bringing in disillusionment when it came to all of these things and potential illusions or mystification, like this sort of fog over the path forward when it came to finances. And the good news is they have both left your second house. They're no longer in Pisces. They're in Aries now, right? And so just a few weeks following them leaving your second house of finances, we now have this new moon and Mercury ending its retrograde, bringing this breath of fresh air into your house of finance, into your house of self-worth, and into the second house, right? And so I'm looking at my notes here. This lunation is inviting you to reflect on how your relationships with money, security, and worth have evolved. This lunation is inviting you to pause and reflect on what were the lessons from those experiences. What were you meant to learn? And based off of this, how can you make more educated decisions as you have this opportunity to have a new lease on life, enter a new chapter, turn the page, start over almost in a sense when it comes to your second house life areas of finances, self-worth, and your material gain, your sense of security. And yeah, like how can you do that? That is what this new moon is all about. And with Mercury retrograde ending here, especially over the last few weeks, you might have during Mercury retrograde, past financial conversations or decisions may have come back into focus. But now that Mercury is ending its retrograde, it's indicating, Mercury rules over communication, words, articulation, and learning. For many of you, you're kind of like regaining that strong sense of being analytical and processing and reviewing these lessons. And you're finally able, for many of you, you'll be able to finally put together and articulate what these lessons were, what it meant to you, what it made you feel like, and basically essentially be able to better process the emotional side and connect it back to the mercurial aspect of the mind and being able to better understand it. And so all that to say, Aquarius friends, I'm really excited for you. Like, you have the opportunity to essentially have a new fresh start, almost like a glow up when it comes to these second house themes. And so under this new moon, it can be very helpful to pause, journal, and reflect on what is your relationship? What has it been like over the last few years with finances? What have your finances looked like? What does your ability to generate income look like? What is your, like, the material things in your life and world? What does that look like? And what are the lessons that you have learned? And how can that inform this new chapter for you? Because this Pisces new moon in your second house is signifying a new chapter in this area of life where you will see the manifestation and the fruits of your labor and the results of what happens next in 6 months under the corresponding Pisces full moon. So yeah, that is my reading for you, my Pisces friends. I'm sending you my love, and I will see you at the end for the journal prompt so we can journal and reflect together. With some Pisces new moon themed journal prompts. I'll see you there. Hello to my Pisces friends, my fellow Pisces friends. This Pisces new moon is all about you. And I am not just saying that because it's in Pisces. I'm saying that because this Pisces new moon and Mercury retrograde that's ending are happening and transiting and activating your first house of your self-image, your first house of your identity, of the things that you initiate, the things that you personally begin in your life, and also the first house of your bodily health, your actual, it's like first house is number one. Like, number one indicates where does everything start, right? It starts with you. It starts with your physical health. It starts with your mindset. It starts with the things that you initiate. What do you start? And it starts with your belief in yourself and how you view yourself. And so all of that, the first house also has to do with like image, how other people view you. It could be your literal physical image as well. And so all of that to say, this new moon and Mercury ending its retrograde in your first house tied to all of these life areas, it's indicating this breath of fresh air, this new chapter, where not only is this new lunar cycle, this new 6-month lunar cycle, where the things that you decide to initiate around this time, especially with the spring equinox coming up, they're directly tied back to your own self-image, and they're things that there's a lot of energetic support with. And with Mercury ending its retrograde here, this is indicating that you are finally finding the words to articulate what your experiences and lessons might have been through this Mercury retrograde that's ending. But on top of that, for a bit of context, Saturn and Neptune were in Pisces for 2+ years, So Saturn and Neptune were just sitting right there, bringing those more heavier Saturnian themes, those more illusory or even sense of like disillusionment type of Neptunian themes. All of those themes were being brought to your first house areas of life for years, okay? And if you're like me, you might have even ended your Saturn retrograde, or Saturn. And if you're like me, let me rewind. And if you're like me, you might have ended your Saturn return recently as well. And as many of you know, Saturn is considered the strict teacher in astrology. It can usher in experiences where you are essentially pushed, where it's kind of like, if you don't mature or move, this is going to be very unpleasant. There's no more procrastinating. The deadline is yesterday. Okay? And your strict teacher, Saturn, is at the door. It ushers in experiences that push you to mature, that push you to level up, that push you to move outside of your comfort zone and understand that when you get outside of your comfort zone and you finally do that thing, you're actually expanding your comfort zone. You're actually expanding your abilities and your skill sets and your experiences for the better in many ways. And then Neptune was there, you might have had some disillusionment or confusion in certain things you might have had some confusion about who are you, who should you be? All of these things, like what do people think of me? And based off of that, all this stuff. And the great news is that Saturn and Neptune left your first house. They're now in your second house in Aries, but they left your first house. And as of this week coming up, there is a new moon in Pisces, indicating this breath of fresh air, this new chapter for you. And Mercury is ending its retrograde, indicating this newfound clarity and this ability to finally articulate and put to words a lot of these experiences and these lessons. And so this new moon is really inviting you guys to reflect on everything that you've learned about yourself during this time, everything that you've learned about yourself during Saturn transiting your first house in Aries, or Saturn transiting your first house in Pisces, Neptune transiting your first house in Pisces. What were the lessons that you learned when that happened, when that was going on? This is a very optimal opportunity for you to pause, sit, and get clear on those things. And I say that because since this is a new moon, a new cycle, you can then step into this new cycle making more educated decisions on the things that you initiate, on who you want to be in this life, on how you want to conduct yourself when it comes to taking care of your physical, your bodily health, your appearance. You are making more informed decisions based off of these lessons, right? And so that is why I invite you to reflect on these things at this time. And again, like with Mercury ending its retrograde here, over the last few weeks, you might have had past versions of you almost like brought up. What comes to mind is I'm a Pisces rising, right? And I've had some experiences recently, specifically with people from my past, still thinking that I am still the way that I used to be, when in reality, I have grown so much and I'm very different from back then. It's actually kind of interesting to think about that now. And it's been kind of like, I don't know I'm sure you guys have this experience where it's like, it's usually the newer friends or people in your life, they accept you for who you are today. Whereas it's a little bit harder sometimes to like finally get people from your past or people that you've known for a longer time to accept who the new you is or how you have evolved or learned or matured and meet you there versus, kind of like treating you like like you have the standards that you used to have or expecting you to not have the same boundaries that you have developed now that have actually helped to fortify the person that you are today. So that's just a sort of an anecdotal sort of example of Mercury retrograde experiences as it pertains to the first house, where past versions of you might come to mind. And sometimes these experiences of your past, they aren't necessarily there to pull you backward, but to help you understand how far you've come. You know, this can be a very celebratory time for many of you. But all of that to say, that's my reading for you, my Pisces friends. This is a huge new chapter for you in a lot of ways. And the things that you choose to initiate under this new moon, around the time of this new moon, or even closer to the spring equinox a few days later, they have legs to run. They have legs to grow, especially if you decide to pause and get clear on what lessons Saturn taught you, what lessons Neptune taught you when they were also in Pisces. And look at this new moon as this sort of teacher who's coming behind them to be like, all right, guys, what did we learn? How do we want to integrate these lessons into our life? You know, here's a new opportunity for you based off of this stuff. It's like this new moon is coming in. It's kind of like, hey, you went through the school of Saturn and Neptune, and here's this degree. What are you going to do with this degree? What are you going to do with it? Sky's the limit. What career path are you going to take with it? You know what I mean? What do you want to do with what you've learned? Because the roads are opening for you. Jupiter ended its retrograde in Cancer in your third house of communication, information exchange. Mercury is ending its retrograde in your first house of the self. How are you going to speak more boldly? How are you going to show up more authentically as yourself? How are you going to listen to those deep down feelings of like, man, I really want to maybe do this or do that. That's so aligned with who you are, these first house themes. You know, how are you going to step out courageously? I'm excited for you and what's to come because it's a lot of good things. But anyway, that's my reading for you. And I will see you in a moment for the Pisces New Moon journal prompts. All right, y'all, it is time for these Pisces New Moon journal prompts. If you have your Auralign digital astrology calendar or digital astrology planner, which I actually am still selling, or the physical planners, you can flip over to the dedicated Pisces New Moon journaling area. Or you can, obviously pull out a notebook or something. But let's see what these journal prompts are, okay? So the first one is, what memories or lessons from the past few years are you maybe still processing, and which ones come through clearly for you? Next, where in your life have you been invited to slow down and listen to your intuition a little more? And finally, do you have any new intentions that you would like to set under this new moon for this new lunar cycle? All right, y'all. Those were the journal prompts. If you made it all the way to the end of the video here, I'd love if you commented 3 fish emojis, for Pisces themes, or comment if you have noticed any of these new moon or retrograde ending Pisces Mercury retrograde themes in your life already. I'd love to hear if any of this resonated with you. Before we go, I'm going to give you some life updates and my Mercury retrograde story. Okay, guys? So where have I been? Okay, I was MIA. I did not make a video for the Virgo eclipse. I'm sorry. I've been, I told you guys I'm going to do these weekly aligned weekly podcast videos. I was MIA. So I just want to catch up on my life. One, I had my parents over. My parents live out of state. They came to visit and we had a lovely week together. And I really wanted to be present with them. And I kind of make this mistake oftentimes. I'm a little scatterbrained. I have a Gemini stellium. This is very Gemini also of like cognitive dissonance, but I just genuinely thought that I would have a lot more time to sort of catch up on my work after they were here. I also overestimated my ability to focus on work while they were here. So that kind of set me back. And then that Virgo eclipse, y'all, that Virgo eclipse. I'm not going to get into the personal details of it, but when I tell you, I had people in my life I hadn't spoken to in almost a year, okay, pop up and boom, there's drama, or boom, okay, there's like a lot of stuff coming up that needs to be handled. I felt pretty burnt out. There was a lot going on. So essentially that's kind of where I was. On top of that Mercury retrograde, I have a Gemini stellium. My Mercury, it just kind of rules everything in my chart in a lot of ways. So I really felt this Mercury retrograde. But all of that to say, I have some good news. I got a new car. And I am so excited to share that with you because I would not have been able to get this car without my business Auralign and without this YouTube channel generating income for myself. And so ultimately, it is thanks to you guys that I have a new car. And so this actually this leads me to my Mercury retrograde anecdotal cautionary tale. You know how astrologers always say, like, try not to initiate anything major under a Mercury retrograde. Just try not to do that. Try not to do that. And it's like, why do they say that, right? Why do we all say that? Sometimes if you start something under a Mercury retrograde, it can indicate that you might have setbacks, not only for the rest of that retrograde, but you might have setbacks that might not even get resolved until the next Mercury retrograde or another Mercury retrograde. There's a bit of good news there. That basically means that whatever that is that you're working on, it's not doomed. It's more so that you have now, it's almost now imbued with this sort of energy of potential setbacks. And when you do finally resolve it, you might actually end up getting exactly what you want, if not better, because you had to circle back and because you had to do a little bit more work and reassess things and reflect on things a lot more, right? Okay, so that's kind of foundational context there. That basically happened to me, y'all. I made the mistake of starting the process of getting a car, and I'll tell you exactly what that looked like for me. I made the mistake of reaching out to auto loan, sources, banks, all that stuff under a Mercury retrograde. And long story short, when I first started looking for the car, I knew exactly what I wanted. But when I first set out to do it, I was like, I'm going to get this car through Carvana, because I do not like salespeople. And then also, some of you guys already know this, like I'm very analytical and I do a lot of research. And there's a lot of very manipulative, like straight up manipulative sales tactics that are very common and normalized within the world of car sales that I personally don't love, right? So anyway, okay. So I was like, okay, I'm going to get the car through Carvana. I don't have to interact with any salespeople. And I want this very specific type of car with these specific features. This is my adult car. This is my I made it car. This is what I'm doing. As almost immediately, within a week of me looking for this car, it was clear I couldn't go through Carvana. I was going to have to go through a salesman. The type of car that I wanted was completely out of my reach, completely not feasible. Then I found a lender. The process of going through this lender was so arduous and it took so long that I had multiple people in my life who were like, that literally is normally handled within a 1 week max. And you're talking about going back and forth with this lender about paperwork and all this stuff for months. What is going on? The peak strain of this entire thing was, remember when there was that Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries? And it was a few weeks ago and it was this huge deal. And everybody was like, oh, Saturn-Neptune conjunction. They're two slower moving planets. This hardly ever happens. This is a big deal. Y'all, that was happening in my second house of finances, right? Okay. The day that it happened, I went to a car dealership because I was like, oh yeah, I can't go through Carvana. Let me go through this thing. I was just kept pushing. I kept pushing. I was like, I'm going to figure this out. This is months. I started this process in November. I went to the dealership February, right? When this conjunction happened, the day of the conjunction in my second house. I had such a horrible experience at this dealership. I literally left crying. I was in the parking lot crying, calling my husband. And guess what, y'all? They were lying to me the entire time. They were discriminating against me. They lied to me and said, if I don't finance with them, they would not sell me the car, which was a lie. They lied to me about a bunch of other things. And by the end of it, I was so tired. I was signing all these things and it took me leaving to finally kind of like tap back into my own energy because they were so manipulative that I was like, this does not feel right. And I'm leaving right now. And you guys, I have the best news. Through a series of events following that Saturn-Neptune conjunction in my second house of finance, I dodged a bullet. Neptune, the planet of illusions, lies. Saturn, the planet of maturity, pushing me to mature, pushing me to stand up for myself in my second house of finances. I had that experience on the day of that conjunction. And under the following Mercury retrograde, after I started this process under the previous retrograde in November, all the way to February of this year, I literally retrograded back to where I started at the beginning of this whole ordeal. And I learned that I was actually able to not only buy my car through Carvana, but you guys, I got the exact car that I originally set out to get. And actually, it's better than the car that I had set out to get, y'all. So that is my testimony, okay? That is my cautionary tale about Mercury retrograde. Be very mindful of the things you initiate, but understand that if you are realizing, oh my gosh, did I start this under a retrograde? Oh my God, it's because of that. It's important to understand that you absolutely still have the potential, literally leaving this whole thing and getting exactly what you wanted and potentially even being better off for it because you had to retrograde back. You had to go back and reassess things over and over and over again for various reasons. It actually ended up leaving you better off for that. And the last thing I will say is that if you like this story and it fascinates you, there's a podcast called The Astrology Podcast, and it's hosted by Chris Brennan, and he did an episode on the movie Back to the Future. And essentially, he talked about the history of Back to the Future and how Back to the Future, the production of it started under a Mercury retrograde. And they had a bunch of arduous issues that caused them to circle back. It wasn't a smooth process. And it wasn't until a following corresponding Mercury retrograde that they ended up getting it done. And as you know, Back to the Future is one of the most influential movies in American cinema. So anyway, that's my story. And I just want to wrap this up by just telling you guys, thank you. Thank you so much. Again, like I would not be able to get this car if it wasn't for you guys being here on YouTube watching this. What is the word? But you guys patronizing my business, being a patron of my, Auralign business. So I thank you. That is it for now. I will see you in the next Aligned Weekly video. And I'm so grateful for you. And I will end this video with my favorite quote. And that is, be gentle with yourself because life is about the journey, not the destination. I don't know why I'm emotional, but I'm just sending you guys my love and deep gratitude. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.